Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf pei, making really great progress in Masechet Zevachim. We're about a little over a month away from finishing. And so we are on the Mishnah on the bottom of Ayin Tet Amud Bet. And we are continuing to discuss mixtures and what you have to do with it when the mixtures involve sacrifices or the parts of sacrifices or the blood associated with sacrifices. So let me share my screen and we'll really get started. And we'll dive right into the Mishnah. So the Mishnah addresses mixtures involving blood of sacrifices. So dam tamimim b'dam bali mumin. If you've got two sacrifices, one that one that is a regular, unblemished, pure, perfect animal, and then the blood of that animal gets mixed with the blood of an animal that has a mum in it, and therefore is no longer a valid sacrifice, and therefore should not be put on the altar. So yishafech la'ama, you need to pour the blood into the amah, the canal that went through the Beis Hamikdash, that effectively served as the drainage system for the Beis Hamikdash. Kos bekosos, if you've got one cup with another cup. So now instead of the blood all being mixed together in one cup, but instead, in one cup, now you've got one cup that had the blemished animal in it, blemished animal's blood in it, and one cup that had the unblemished animal's blood in it. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, im karav kos echad, if you brought one cup, Yikruvu kola kosas. You can now bring all the cups, because we can say that maybe the one cup that you brought is was the actually problematic one, and now everything that's left is absolutely fine. And we also saw that Rav Elazar interpreted this. Rav Elazar, the Amora, interpreted Rabbi Eliezer's comment as being where you bring pairs, because when it comes to each pair, we know that only one cup of the problematic blood was mixed in, and so as a result, one of those pair is definitely okay, and the other one of the pair, and we don't know which one, so that's one suffix. And then we don't, and then in addition, it could be that it isn't even in the group that's left, because it was already spilled on the altar. And so as a result, we have a double suffix on when you bring two, and therefore you are able to bring them two by two. But back into our Mishnah, the Chachamim say, no, you can't do it. Afilu karvu kulan chutz me'echad mehen. Even if a mistake was made and all of the cups were brought, with the exception of just one, yishapech la'ama, that one needs to be thrown into the canal, because we're worried that maybe that's the problematic one. So it's the exact, on some level, opposite of what Rabbi Eliezer says. Rabbi Eliezer says we can rely that the one that you already did was the problematic one, and the Chacham say no, the last one is still the problematic one. All right, but in any event, let's take a quick look in Rashi on the Mishnah. Dam tamimim b'dam bali mumim milsa deshchichahi. And Rashi points out, as we've seen over the last couple of days, that one of the questions for us to discuss is it a common thing? If it's a common thing, so then we have to be worried that if we allow you to move forward with this mixture, maybe you'll move forward with a mixture where the problematic thing is the majority. And so as a result, we don't want that to happen. And so therefore the rabbis make a decree. So milcha deshchikahi, the fact that you might get blood of a blemished animal in the Beis Hamikdash, that's going to be something that happens on a regular basis, because you offered it up, and then all of a sudden you see that there's a blemish. V'yishbok la'ama, and you need to therefore pour the blood into the canal. Gzeira shema Lo yirbe alav v'yakshireyu, because maybe you won't have more of the kosher blood than the non-kosher blood, and you'll still say it's kosher. So that's why we need to be careful about it. Have a seat. Have a seat. We're doing a lot of Rashis today, so you'll be very happy about that.
Okay.
So here we go. So we're talking about mixing of blood. So of sacrifices. So hanitarim. All right. So that is case number one. Two animals get mixed together. The blood gets mixed together. One blemished, one unblemished. If they're mixed together in a mixture, everybody seems to agree that you pour it into the canal. If you mix it together when you have different cups, when they're still in different cups, but now we're not sure which cup is which, well, then Rabbi Eliezer says as long as one has already been brought, so then all of them can be brought. And if the Chachamim say no, even if all of them but one have been brought, they can't be brought. So hanitanim lamata. Now let's do a different mixture. The second mixture is we've got blood that goes below. So that is like an ola or something, other sacrifices where the blood is sprinkled below on the altar, below the line, below the midline of the altar. And it gets mixed up with blood that gets sprinkled above, namely a chatas. Rabbi Eliezer says, Yitain lamala. You can put the blood above, Viroa ani es hatachtonim milamalan ki'ilu mayan. And what we do is we imagine, we treat the blood that is supposed to go below, that is now being put above, we treat that as if it was just water. And so therefore you haven't done anything wrong. You haven't put anything in the wrong place, because we're going to just treat it as water. And then you can go and put it below. Let's take a look in Rashi. This is Rashi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up. The beginning of Rashi begins 7 lines up from the bottom of Rashi. Roa ani otan. I look at this blood, ki'ilu hein mayim, as if it's the water. Because when it comes to determining the priority of which sacrifice we offer first, and we do the sacrifices that put the blood above the line, above the midline of the altar, namely the chatas, before you do the sacrifices that go below the line, namely like an ola. Now we're talking about chatas and ola of a large animal, because a bird, it's actually reversed. But in any event, the bottom line is that we're going to go do the sprinkling above before the sprinkling below. As we are going to see in Perek Kol HaTadir, basically 10 days from now, God willing, we'll see on Daf Pei Tet Amud Aleph, Shiyahu Kol HaChataos Kodmos La'olas, that the Chatas comes before the Ola, because the Chatas puts the blood on the top, and the Ola puts the blood on the bottom. And then then back into the Mishnah, then afterwards, we said that you then go ahead and you put the blood below. And what does that mean? Let's take a look, actually, next Rashi, Yitain Lamala. So, Tchila, that you put it above first, Va'achakach Lamata, and then you put below. Unitinas mata talelo l'shvicha shirayim shalchatas shvlahatchil matanos ola. And when you put the blood below, what are you accomplishing? You're accomplishing two things. One is, again, we have a mixture of blood from an ola and a chatas. And so what Rabbi Eliezer says you could do is you first put some of the blood on the top. And of course, any of the blood that's from the top that's for the chatas is where it's supposed to go. And that's great. It's where it's supposed to go. Right. And any of the blood from the ola that's not supposed to go there, we're going to treat that blood as if it was water. Roa, in a concept called roa, as we're going to see over the course of today. And when it comes to then, you have what's left over. So what do you do with what's left over? Well, the leftover blood, part of that blood is going to be ola blood, and we're going to put it on the lower half of the altar, and that will fulfill the obligation of the lower half of the altar. And what do you do with the leftover blood from a chatas? Well, the leftover blood from a chatas, like the leftover blood from everything, gets poured on the base. And so when you put it on the wall below the midline, it will presumably drip down to the base, and it will fulfill the obligation there as well. So we fulfill both the obligation to pour out the leftover of the chatas and to make the first and initial application of the ola. And so as a result, we've satisfied everything. The Chachamim disagree. And they say, back into the Mishnah, right, the Chachamim Omrim, that is the end of the second to last line on Ayin Tedem Bet. The Chachamim say, Yishboch la'ama. No, it all gets poured into the canal. And Rashi tells us, Yishboch la'ama, delays lahu roin, because they don't say that we could treat it as if it was water. They don't say let's just view it as water. So they don't use the concept of roin. Again, that's the concept that we're going to be seeing. Do we say that let's just pretend that blood wasn't blood, it was just water? V'ein mishanin b'taktonin b'shvil lahakshir ha'elyonim. And the point is that we're not going to let you change the process associated with sacrifices whose blood is supposed to go below, and in order to make a sacrifice whose blood is supposed to go above. So therefore, it all has to go into the canal, and therefore, it's all going to be thrown away. And it's not going to be a valid sacrifice at all.
Is there anybody concerned that the blood, if they put the blood on the top, the mixture of blood, it will drip to the bottom just by gravity?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Remember that there was an opinion that says that if you get it in the wrong location, it's kosher for exactly that reason. But this either doesn't hold of that or believes that because it's a mixture, therefore that's not a legitimate method of application. So back into the Mishnah, v'imlo nimlach, and if you didn't ask, and the v'nasan, and the Kohen just went ahead and did it, so then kasher, it's going to be kosher. Whatever application he made, it's going to be kosher because for that application, meaning if he puts some blood above, well then that's going to be kosher as a chatas. And if he puts some blood below, it's going to be kosher as an ola. And the reason is because we consider all of the blood mixed together. And so certainly some of the blood is going to be of chatas if you go above and of a ola if you go below. And therefore everything's going to be wonderful. Okay? Although Rashi, right, as Rashi says, the imlo nimlach v'nasan kasher. Now we're assuming Rashi's assuming that we're just putting it above the line. So ha'elyon, the above the line one is going to be kosher. Dahanitan mimenu lamala, because you actually went ahead and you put it above. V'yaksor, and then the Yud Zayin adds v'yaksor v'yitin lamata, and then you went ahead and you put it below, and so as a result, you have fulfilled every aspect of the obligation, and arguably you've even fulfilled the obligation associated with the tachton as well, and so as a result, you would have fulfilled the obligation of the ola too if you do them both. Okay,
but if it drips down on its own, then it automatically.
If it drips down on its own, that's not sufficient according to the rabbis based on what we're saying at the moment. Now, remember, if you put it above, never mind. That's not what I said.
But it's not automatically fulfilling that obligation if it drips down on its own?
Well, remember that if you put it above, especially if you put it where a chatas goes,
right,
it is above the walkway. Remember that there's a base, and then 5 amos up, or 6 amos up, there is a walkway. And so that walkway would potentially prevent the blood from dripping down to the lower half of the altar. So it's not necessarily so clear that the only way that you would have something that was put above drip down to below is when you were on the walkway. Instead of putting it next to you, you put it below in the first amma below you. Then that would be still above the midline, and it could drip down. But otherwise, if you put it on the top of the altar, like the requirement is for the chatas, it's not so clear that it would actually ever get down to the to the bottom. It might dry before the blood would seep all the way down because of the ledge that exists, 6 amos up, which is 1 amma wide, and so that's a lot of space for blood to drip before it could actually get to the bottom half of the altar. Okay, so continuing on, we're now at the top of Hey Amud Aleph. So, and here again, keep one finger on Rashi and one in the Gemara. So, on Natanin, b'matana achas, if you have if you have a sacrifice that only has one blood application, and Rashi says, what kind of example is that? Kagon dam bechor, like the blood of a bechor animal. Shenis arav b'dam maser. Or that gets mixed up with I'm sorry, let's finish the line. Back into the Gemara, top line of the Gemara. Shenis arvo benitanin matana achas. So you have two sacrifices that both have one application of blood. And Rashi tells us, for example, you have the blood of a Bechor that gets mixed up with the blood of a Meiser, Bain bebalul, Bain bekosos, whether you actually mix the blood or you have two cups and now you're not sure which cup is which. You're not, so then back into the Gemara, what do you do with it? You're not, you know what? Good news.
Good news.
Because both sacrifices have the same kind of application. We could just do that kind of application and everything will work. All right. So as Rashi says, you're not new b'matana achas kasal kadaidak. At the moment, what we're assuming is hashda da amrinan yesh bila. We're assuming that we're talking about that there is a mixture that when the two liquids mix together, that they get completely mixed together. And so every drop of blood in the mixture would have part from one sacrifice and part from another sacrifice. And that's why we can assume that one application of blood will have blood from both of the sacrifices. And if we're talking about a mixture of cups, well, then we give one application from one cup and one application from the other cup. So that's the next case in our Mishnah. Now we go to another complicated case. Matan arba, b'matan arba. What about if we have two sacrifices where they're different sacrifices, but they both have an application that is supposed to go on all four walls? So, and Rashi gives us an example. Matan arba, b'matan arba, kimo dam ola, b'dam shlamim. So, for example, an ola and a shlamim, that both of them have two applications that put it on all four sides. O b'dam asham. Or you can have an asham as one of them. Shishneim te'unim shtei matanos shehin arba. Those require the two applications that are four. And we saw that there's a machlokas. Is it actually four applications, one on each side of the wall? But the bottom line is that you put it on the simplest interpretation is that there are two locations that you stand and you put it on the corner on both sides. And so as a result, on opposite corners. And so as a result, you end up with blood on all four sides. Ushneim taktonim, and all three of these sacrifices, the ola, the shlamim, and the asham, all go below the line. And so as a result, they're all in the same location. They're all at the same, half of the altar. And so therefore, we can just, if they're mixed up together, we can just do two applications on the two corners because we'll assume that the blood is all mixed together and you'll have some of each of them in any application. And if there are cups, so then you'll do the two for one cup and then you'll do the two for the other cup. So, but now one more complication. Matan arba b'matan achat. So what about if the situation is where you have one animal that is supposed to get four applications and one that's supposed to get one application? So, and Rashi gives us an example. Kagon dam ola, which has four applications, bibechor, which has one application, shehein tachtonim, and they're all below the line. So there's no question about whether you're doing it in the wrong half of the altar, on the wrong top or bottom of the altar. So that's not a problem. So now what do you do in that situation? Well, now we have a debate. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yinasnu b'matan arba, and Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Yinasnu b'matana achas. Now, so when it comes to Rabbi Eliezer, he says you put down 4 applications. And what's the explanation? So take a look at Rashi. The roa hamatanos hayaseros hanitonos midam habachor. And what do we think about the extra applications that are now happening from the blood of the bachor? Ki'ilu hein mayim. Again, Rabbi Eliezer says the principle of Rowan. Let's just view the extra applications as if the blood is not blood, but is actually water, and we effectively, therefore, can ignore them. And you know what? This is not a violation of acts of doing extra mitzvos in the Torah. You're not adding to the mitzvah. You're not trying to say that actually a bechor is supposed to have 4 applications. And where Yoshua says, no, you have to do 1 application. Mishum Baal Tosef. We have to be worried about Baal Tosef. That if you were to do 4 applications for a Bechor, that would be saying that you're supposed to, it would be like saying you're supposed to do 4 applications for a Bechor. And if you're supposed, and you're not allowed to do that. When we have a mitzvah, so for example, we put tefillin on our arms, and the tefillin has 4 different parshios. If we say, you know what, I'm going to add a 5th parsha, that's a violation of the mitzvah of the commandment of Baal Tosef, and so we don't want to do that. And so as a result, Rabbi Yoshua says, no, we're going to do 1 applications. All right.
But there is a situation where we can wear more than one set of tefillin at once.
That is true, but that is not necessarily a violation of Baal Tosef, because the Torah doesn't say that you should only put on 1 pair of tefillin. The Torah, that we learned from the Torah, that they're only supposed to be 4 parshios. So that would be the explanation as to why wearing 2 pairs of tefillin, as some people do that in order to wear both Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi tefillin. But in any event, the point is that that's not going to be the same violation of Baal Tosef. All right, so so continuing on in this Rashi, so b'matana achas mishum Baal Tosef v'yedei ola yatsa, and you know what? You're even fulfilled the obligation of the ola, because you know why? Because the kol hanitanim al mizbeach hachitzon, because we saw that if you have any kind of sacrifice that has blood applications on the outer altar, Nitnan b'matana achas kiper, that if you do at least 1 application, even though you didn't do all the applications you're supposed to, it is still you get atonement. It works. The sacrifice works. And so, as a result, that's the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Are we worried about Baal Tosef or not? Well, Rabbi Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yoshua, Harehu over al Baal Tigra. You're concerned about the Baal Tosef when it comes to the Bechor, and that you're doing 4 applications for a Bechor that are supposed to only get 1. But now you're going to be violating the commandment of Baal Tigra of not subtracting from the mitzvot. And so as a result, when you do 1 for the Ola, you're subtracting from the mitzvah. So that's a problem. So Amar le Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Yoshua says back to him, Harehu over al Baal Tosef, but you're violating Baal Tosef by doing too many. So Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer responds to Rabbi Yoshua's concern, Lo nemar Baal Tosef elikeshehu ba'atzmo. Well, you only violate Baal Tosef when it's just the item itself. Here we have a mixture of Bechor and Ola, and so as a result, you can't say that I'm trying to add to the Bechor requirement. I'm just trying to fulfill the Ola requirement. So you can't say that that's a violation of Baal Tosef. Well, Rabbi Yoshua says right back to him, so Amar lo Rabbi Yoshua, lo namar Baal Tigra elikashu ba'atzmo. Similarly, you're not going to have a problem with reducing the number of mitzvot or reducing the obligations associated with a mitzvah if when it comes to something, if it's not by itself. Va'od Amar Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Yoshua adds to it, Kishinasata Avarta al Bal Tosif. When you actually do the application, you are violating, you're doing an affirmative violation, Vasita Masa V'yadcha, and you're doing something with your hand. You're actually doing an affirmative action. But Uvishalona Sata Avarta al Bal Tigra, below Asisa Masa V'yadcha. But it's better to not do something. Meaning, if I'm going to violate the Torah, and no matter what I do, I'm going to violate the Torah. Right? That's bad. So the question is, am I better off violating the Torah through an affirmative action or through a passive inaction? And what Rabbi Yoshua is saying back to Rabbi Eliezer is it's way better to do it through an inaction. If I'm not going to do something that's right, and it's better to be passive than to be active. As Rashi says, last Rashi on the Mishnah, this is now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines down in the narrow lines. There's no comparison between somebody who does an action and somebody who doesn't. And when you don't do an action and the prohibition just comes on its own, that's not comparable. And so as a result, that's the machlokes between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. It does seem, based on the Masorah based on the Ein Mishpat, that we follow Rabbi Yoshua. But now let's take a look at the Gemara. So Amar Rabbi Elazar. So what Rabbi Elazar says, again, this
sounds like Sheva Al Tasa.
What?
It sounds like Sheva Al Tasa.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it's like. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Lo Heksher Rabbi Eliezer Ela Shnaim. When we said in the very beginning of this Mishnah that if you had a cup of blood from a unblemished animal, a tamimim animal, and a cup of blood from a blemished animal, from an animal with a mum, and we don't know which is which, and we have a whole bunch of those where we have 1 cup of the blemished and 10 cups of the unblemished, and one of them gets put on the altar. So Rabbi Eliezer said, now they all can get put up on the altar, because we can say, again, maybe it's one way or maybe it's the other way. And as we saw in connection with the Avarim, with the limbs, where we made the same point exactly, Rabbi Elazar says that when Rabbi Eliezer says that you could put them all up, he means that you can do them 2 at a time. Aval echad lo, but not 1 at a time. And again, the reason is as we said when we were learning the Mishnah at the beginning of today's daf, that you combine the logic of saying, well, we know it's not this one, we know it's not one of them, so there's a one suffix about whether or not it's the one that is definitely not, and maybe it's not even in the group any longer because it was already offered. So effectively, you make it into some kind of sveka, and so as a result, that's why you're able to do it. So Masiv Rav Dimi asks the question, but but 1 second, the rabbi said that if you spilled all the blood other than even just 1 cup, that 1 cup needs to be poured into the canal. And according to Rebbe Eliezer, you would not be allowed to. He should agree with that, because 1 cup is not 2 cups. So if there's 1 cup left, you shouldn't be able to do it. So Amar le Rabbi Yaakov le Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yaakov explained, Bar Tachlifa Asper Allah. Bar Tachlifa, I'm going to explain it to you. My echad zug echad. When we say 1, we mean 1 pair, and so as a result, that's the case. And so they actually do argue. Okay, so sorry for not scrolling. So now that we said that, we have the question. We had this argument already with respect to limbs. Why are we having this argument again with respect to blood? Utsricha, as Rashi says, first Rashi on the Gemara, Utsricha lepluge betarbaya. We need to have the argument by both of them, Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbanan, the Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis. B'bali mumin, when it comes to blemished animals, Avarim, bekosos. Whether you're mixing up limbs or cups, it doesn't make a difference. both of these arguments are necessary. Now, why is that the case? Back into the Gemara. Because if we only had the first case of the limbs, Bahakama Rabbi Eliezer, maybe Rabbi Eliezer would only say it in that instance, Mishum de Isavid Be Kapara. So, because the blood of the limbs has already been put on the altar, and therefore you fulfilled all the obligation. The emurim are not a necessary component, and so this is not so necessary. So as a result, we can be more lenient with respect to it. Aval baha emamodi lahu rabbanan. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer would agree with the rabbis when it comes to blood, because the blood is so crucial, and so as a result, maybe we have to be extra concerned. And if we only had it in connection with the blood, maybe the rabbis would only say their statement in that instance, because that the blood is so important, and so therefore that's why they wouldn't allow you to do it. Aval baha, when it comes to the limbs, ema modulo Rabbi Eliezer, maybe they would agree with Rabbi Eliezer, because you've already affected the atonement by doing the blood. So tzricha, we need them both. Okay. So next, the Gemara discusses the case of ordinary water falling into a container of para aduma water. We saw this statement earlier in our Masechet, and it's citing a Mishnah in the 9th Perek, the first Mishnah in the 9th Perek of Para, of Maseches Para, and we're eventually going to challenge one of 3 interpretations of Rebbe Eliezer's opinion in this Mishnah in Para from our Mishnah. And so let's take a look and let's see if we can get there. So Tanan Hasam, so if you have a flask of water that in which some regular water comes in, and Rashi tells us, we're going to keep a finger on Rashi. So tzloches, this is now a little bit above the midline in the narrow lines of Rashi. Tzloches shalmei chatas, we're talking about a flask of chatas water, meaning para aduma water, hamukadshin, that is sanctified and ready to be used, shenafal latocha mayim de alma, that regular water from the world falls into it, kol shehu, a minute amount. So Rabbi Eliezer, Omer Yazeh shtei hazos. Back into the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer says that we are going to do 2 sprinklings. V'chachamim poslim, and the chachamim say that it's just puzzle. Now, Tosos here, take a look at Tosos. We're going to go back to Ayin Tedem Abet, very short Tosos, bottom line on Ayin Tedem Abet. Tanan Hasam b'Maseches Paratz Lukas Shenafal L'Toka Mayim Shel Kol Shehu Chumra Demei Chatasu. This is a stringency associated with the water of Paraduma, the Midoraisa Batal Barova. Because again, if only 1 drop of regular water fell in, we should say that it's batal, but we're concerned that maybe more will fall in and you'll still say it's kosher, and therefore, from the rabbinic perspective, we're going to say that it's not permitted. Okay, so now back into the Gemara. So Bishlama Rabbanan, I understand why the rabbis would say their opinion and say it's all puzzle sabra yesh bila, because they say that the water mixes all together, and therefore every little, even though it's a kol shehu of the non-kosher water, is just a minuscule amount, but every drop of the water will contain a very, very small amount of that minuscule amount. And yet, a sprinkling, if I do any sprinkling, you have to do the full sprinkling on the person. It is not kosher if any aspect of the sprinkling is made less. And here, this sprinkling is made less because one part of that one little drop is going to be in your sprinkling, and so it's not going to be fully kosher water. And aim it starvin lahazos. And one further concept is we are not going to combine sprinklings, and because we're not going to combine sprinkling, you can't make it up by sprinkling twice. So Ella Rabbi Eliezer. But when it comes to Rabbi Eliezer, my kasavar, what is he thinking? If he says that there's no possibility of mixing, meaning that the drop of regular water stays as an individual drop, and we just don't know where in the mixture it is. My hubby, what do you accomplish by doing 2? Because we don't know where that one drop is. Dilma Tarvayu, Maya Kamazi. Maybe both of them are really just the regular water and not the other kind of water. Ela kasavar yesh bila. So now maybe you're going to say that it means that there is mixing. Well, ikasavar ein hazat tzricha shir. But and if he thinks that the sprinkling does not require a minimum amount of chatas water, so lama lishtei hazos. Why does he need to have two sprinklings? He says that you need to do two times. Elakasavar hazat srikashir. So it must be that he holds that you can do two that you can't, that there is a minimum amount. But ve'ikasavar ain mitzdarvin lahazos. But if he holds that you can't combine, ki mazeh shtei hazos, my hubby, what do you do? What are you accomplishing when you do two? Ve'inami mitzdarvin lahazos. And even if we do combine sprinklings, mi yamar demale le shiura. How do I know that necessarily the second sprinkling finished the job and was sufficient to accomplish everything? So three different explanations. Amar Reish Lakish laolam yesh bila. Reish Lakish offers the first, and so and that is that we're going to say really that Rabbi Eliezer says that that there are that there is mixing, and so the water, that one drop of regular water, is thoroughly mixed throughout the rest of it. And he holds that you need a minimum amount. So as a result, that first sprinkling is not going to be kosher. And here's what we're talking about. And what we're talking about is where the amount of water you have is equal to just two sprinklings. And so as a result, we know by definition that if you have one portion of mechatas and one portion of regular water, and they're mixed together, and I do two sprinklings that use up all of the water, well then by definition, I have done one full good sprinkling of mechatas. So everything is fine and dandy. So that's the situation according to Reish Lakish. Rava offers the second explanation, and he says, La'olam yesh bila, really, there is mixing. V'hazah ein tzricha shir. And you know what? The mix, there is no minimum amount. And why is it that you need to do two sprinklings? Because after all, the first sprinkling is sufficient because there's no minimum amount. The rabbis did a knas on the person because we didn't want him to benefit from the extra water that's put in. Because if he benefits, if somehow dropping in regular water gives us more mechatas is a very precious commodity. As I think Ken noted, or maybe it was Charlie noted a couple of sessions ago, there weren't that many paradumas in the entire history. We need to be as careful as possible, and we need as much of it as possible. And so as a result, maybe we have to make sure that we don't have an incentive to put in regular water. So that's opinion number 2. And opinion number 3, Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi says, Ein Bila. No, there is no mixing. Yazesh Shtei Azos. But he needs to do it twice because maybe the first one has some of is actually all the problematic water. And when he do it the second time, because it was only one drop, and what you're doing is more than one drop, so then the second one will be sufficient, and of course vice versa. If the first one didn't have anything in it, so then the second one wasn't necessary, and the first one was totally fine if it didn't have any of the regular water in it. So those are the 3 explanations. We are now going to offer 7 challenges to Reish Lakish and Rav Ashi. The first challenge is to Reish Lakish.
What is the basis for saying that the small drop is not mevatel in the mechatas? I mean,
so that was the Tosos that we saw that says that basically midoraisa it is batal, but midorabanan then midorabanan we're going to say that because of the stringency, because of the importance of paraduma water, we're going to say that that we're going to treat it as if it's not batal, and therefore it's going to be problematic. Okay, so now again, Meisvei, 1, 2.
It just seems like we learned a few days ago that if there was a small drop, that it would be batel. But I mean, we talked about.
I don't think we ever explicitly said that that one drop is going to be bottle. The question is there a way that it's going to be that we can be confident that the sprinkling did what it needed to do, but not that it was bottle.
Well, I
If
mean,
that
I
was
know.
what
I mean, as you mentioned, I raised this point a few days ago that there's a certain amount of paradumot. I mean, there are only 8, 9, 10 of them in the right. So you got it. They want to preserve and use as much carefully so that there's enough.
correct. So that's why the rabbi said that if any water drops into it, it all becomes puzzle because we need to make sure that we preserve what we got, and you got to be very careful with it. Otherwise, it's going to be problematic. So it's in order to emphasize how we want to make sure to treat this with great respect and not let anything else fall into it. That's exactly right. So Meisvei, so now we're going to ask a challenge, a series of 7 challenges. As I said, the first challenge, we're third line from the bottom on Pei Amud Aleph. So Meisvei, Rebbe Omer, Ledivre Rebbe Eliezer, that according to Rebbe Eliezer, Hazah Kolshehu Mitaheres, a sprinkling of any amount purifies. Hazah ain tzricha shir, and that's because there is no minimum amount. Hazah mechza kasher mechza pasul. And so as a result, the water used for the sprinkling can even be half valid and half invalid, according to Rebbe Eliezer. And so that conflicts with Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said that according to there is a minimum amount. And so therefore, and he's the only one who said that there's a minimum amount. None of the other opinions said that there is a minimum amount. And so as a result, that's why Reish Lakish can't be the correct interpretation. And so now that we've rejected Reish Lakish, now we're going to challenge Rav Ashi. And we're going to challenge him, 5 more times today. And then we'll leave the final challenge, which effectively will force us to reinterpret our Mishnah, God willing, for tomorrow. So, Tanya Behedja, we also learned explicitly, Hanitanim Lamala, that if you put the blood supposed to go above, Shinis Arvum Hanitanim Lamata, and if you mix it with blood that's supposed to go below, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yitain Lamala, you can put it all above, Vatachtonim Ololo, and then you put it below, and it all works, meaning you can do the above and then the below. And so as a result, the Amrat Ein Bila. Now, if you say, according to you, Rav Ashi, that there is no mixing of the blood, so then Amai Alulo. Why should the bottom application work, or why should any of the applications work? Dilma Kayav El Yonim Lamata, Batakton Lamala. Maybe all the blood that was supposed to go above went below, and all the blood that was supposed to go above, that is supposed to go below, went above. So maybe it's all not good if there's no mixture. So doesn't that show that Rav Ashi is wrong and that we have to be dealing with a mixture? No, not necessarily. Here's what we're talking about. Kagon de'ika ruba el yonim. No, where the majority of the blood is blood from the animal that gets put above. The kayav lamala shir taktonim va'od. And how much do you put above? You put, if let's say it's 60% blood from above, 40% blood from below, you put 41% of the blood above. And now what do we know? Well, there was only 40% of the blood from below. So we know that at least 1% of the blood that you're putting on there was from above. And so as a result, because there's no shear to the amount of blood that you need to put, everything works. And so that's what we're saying. 1 second.
Why do you think from above? You're putting it on above, right? You're putting it above.
From the animal whose blood is supposed to go above. That's what I mean. From the animal whose blood is supposed to go above, we put that we're sure that at least 1% of the overall blood is from the animal that is supposed to go above. So, but 1 second, that Brisa says that the application of below also helps. And if the application of below also helps, let's imagine what it could be. If the 41% was put above, so And we're saying that maybe the 40% of that 41% was all the blood that was supposed to go below. But now you put the rest of the blood, you put 59% of the blood below. Now that is all shirayim of the chatas that was supposed to go above. And so as a result, none of the blood that was supposed to go below is being put below. So how can you possibly say that you're achieving something? What are you achieving? And so the Gemara answers l'shem shirayim. You know what? You're right. The Ola sacrifice, it's not actually fulfilling the obligation of the Ola sacrifice, because that's the sacrifice whose blood is supposed to go below. And maybe all of that sacrifice's blood has been put above. And so as a result, the only thing that you have fulfilled by putting the rest of the blood below is that you fulfilled the obligation to put the shirayim on the lower half of the altar.
Now, wasn't the blood mixed?
It was mixed, but remember.
So then, how do you know that? How do you can't?
According to Rav Ashi, because we don't say it, we say ein bila. We don't imagine every drop as having a mixture of both bloods. And so as a result, we are concerned that that when you do the 41% of blood above, maybe, not sure, certainly, but maybe maybe all of the blood that was supposed to go below was done in that application. And therefore, none of the blood that was supposed to go below ever got to the below. And therefore, the Ola is not going to be valid. And because we're uncertain, we can't allow this sacrifice to fulfill the person's obligation. And
that's a stretch, though, because if blood is mixed and you don't know which blood comes from where, you just take a handful of blood, let's say, whatever, you throw it here, you throw it there. It's more conceivable that some of Ola is below and some of Chatas is above, and so not to say that
100%.
Exclusively there's no Ola blood below. To say that
the definition of what you are saying.
It seems preposterous to say that.
The definition of what you are saying, Kenneth, is yesh bila. That is the definition of yesh bila. So it's definitely saying, and I agree with you, that yesh bila makes a lot more sense. But it's important to remember that blood is not as sort of easy to mix as water. But we say this concept across all liquids, but the bottom line is that the concept of ein bila is to say that we don't know for sure, that we don't treat, you're absolutely right, that if a mixture is half one and half another, you would think that if you pull up a cup, you're going to have some of both. But ein bila says, we don't make that assumption. You cannot make that assumption. It's not a reasonable assumption in that case. And so as a result, that's what we're challenging. You're exactly right. This is the challenge to the concept of ein bila that Rav Ashi says. So that's challenge number one to Rav Ashi, and that's been unsuccessful. So now we go to the next challenge, our third question, our second challenge of Rav Ashi. So tashma lamata below nasan lamata below nimlach. If you apply the blood below without asking, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Yachzor v'yitin lamali, go and put it above, v'atachtonim ololo, and the bottom will also work. So what does that mean? So again, if Rabbi Eliezer says ein bila, as Rav Ashi says, how could it ever work? Meaning, why are you telling me to put some above? That's not going to work. So hachanami beruba el yonim. Again, we're talking about where a majority is upper blood, is blood for that's supposed to go above. But kayav lamala shir tachtonim va'od, and you apply above the amount that is of blood that is supposed to go below from the mixture. So again, 41 plus a little bit. So at least if 40% of the blood is from an ola and 60% is from a chatas, you'll apply 41% above. And again, we'll know that at least some of the blood that's supposed to go above is being applied above. Being applied above. But 1 second, we just said in the brisa that the lower blood counts. So again, l'shem shirayim. It doesn't count for the purposes of the ola. The ola is not going to be kosher, but the chatas will be kosher, and the shirayim will be considered to have been poured. So question number 4, and third question on Rav Ashi, Tashma nasanan lamala v'lo nimlach. If you put the blood above and you don't ask any questions, elu ve'elu modem shiyachzar v'yitin lamata. Everybody agrees. Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis agree that you should go back and put blood below. Ve'elu ve'elu alolo. And you know what? Both of the bloods count. Both of the bloods count, meaning that it seems our initial understanding is that the korban chatas, where you applied the blood above, works, and the korban ola, where you applied the blood below, works. 1 second, hachanami. So doesn't that show that Rebbe Eliezer must say that there's blending? Because otherwise, how can you be sure that any of the blood that went that some of the blood that's supposed to go above went on the above, and some of the blood that went supposed to go below went on the below? You don't know. If you say Ein Bila, it could be that the bloods got completely confused. So hakanami beruba elyonim v'kayav l'mala shir tachtonim ba'od. Again, we'll say that the amount that you apply above is 41% because 40% was the amount from an animal that was supposed to get the application below. But but 1 second, this Baraisa specifically said that both sets of blood count, and so doesn't that show that they both count and that both sacrifices are valid? So Mikatani Elu ve'elu modim. 1 second, it didn't say, when it said Elu ve'elu modim, it did not say that the modim went on the alu low. Elu ve'elu alu lo katani. Seifa atan l'rabanan da amri yesh bila. No, when it says elu ve'elu alu lo, it's only according to the rabbis. Yes, everybody agrees that you need to go back and you apply also blood below. But the rabbis say that, you know what? Both of them count because they say yesh bila. And so as a result, everything is wonderful. But according to Rebbe Eliezer, only the chatas will work because you apply 41% above. And we don't know. Maybe no of the ola blood got applied below. And therefore, it's not going to be valid. And finally, we now question Rav Ashi's interpretation from our Mishnah. And that serves us as the basis. So Tashma hanitana b'matana akas shenis arbu b'nitana b'matana akas. If you got in our mission, we said if you have 1 and 1, yinasnu b'matana akas, you apply one application. The amras ein bila. Now, but if you say that there's no mixture, amai yinasnu b'matana akas doma mahaykayav umahay lokayav. 1 second, how could one application work? Because we're dealing with a mixture of blood, and maybe you only got from the Bechor, and you didn't get anything from the Meiser. And so as a result, how do you know that the blood application got from both? Doesn't that show that Rav Ashi is wrong and that Rabbi Eliezer actually says, Yesh Bila? No. Kagon shenis arvu achas ba'achas. And we're dealing with when two things got mixed together, and it was exactly enough for 2 applications. And so if you make 2 single applications, we know for sure that both bloods are going to be applied. Okay, so given that I have this as a possible stopping point, we have actually 2 more questions still to go. 1 more question that's not going to be successful, and then we will ask a successful question. We're not done asking from our Mishnah to challenge Rav Ashi, but for the last 2 challenges, which will force us, the last of the challenges will force us to revisit how we understand our Mishnah, you're going to need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Please note that tomorrow and Friday and this coming Wednesday and Thursday, Dove is going to be covering for me. So if you're coming, please
Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week.
So tomorrow and Friday, and then next Wednesday and Thursday. So basically between now and next Friday will be the next time we'll have it in person.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Gotcha.
Looking
Dr.
forward to
Carr.
continuing our learning together. Be well.